as a father, I have always anticipated the birth of my kids, and I was a young father. My oldest is actually 19 now, but I remember that we were kind of getting prepared for her. Her name is Charity, and so she was born in Macomb, Illinois. And so we went to the hospital, and they kind of showed us like where the birthing place would be, where we would get to sit, and where we'd be able to gather, and just kind of how the timing would go for her birth. I had the pleasure of watching, obviously, my daughter Charity being born, and then I also had the excitement of actually seeing twins being born. And what was amazing to me is that once they allowed me to go and sit next to my wife, right next to her head, I got to see just the miracle that was the doctors and the nurses, and just how they were gowned up, and the supplies were ready, and everything was just taken care of. There was no care in the world. My whole attention was allowing me to stand at the head of my wife and just focus on the birth of our twins. And it was truly a miracle, right? So as we think about that, we now have this opportunity to really look at a season where we can truly focus on the birth of the Christ and his coming to be. And so during Christmas, we have a lot of opportunity to, celebrate in the pageantry and the traditions, the gifts and the food. So one thing I'd like to start off with is just thank you for this gift of allowing me to step up and share the Lord's word, but then just share with all of you. I've had a few people come up and say, oh, we're ready for your preaching. And I have so much respect for what actual preachers do and the study that they put in. So tonight, let's just call it conversation and teaching. After our twins were born, they were actually born several weeks early, which meant they had to spend 6 weeks in the NICU. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with St. Luke's NICU, but it's a stage 3 NICU, meaning it's highly rated and super prepared. When my little guy Peyton came up, the one that didn't light or say anything, standing next to his mom, he was born with what they called white boy wimpy syndrome, meaning his lungs weren't quite ready. But he needed just the slightest whiff of pressure and air, or his stats would start to go down. His sister in the NICU even received a little bit of an infection that the doctors had to get on. But had we not been here, had we not been in Idaho, had we not had an opportunity to go to the St. Luke's NICU, who knows what those outcomes would have been for both Peyton and Riley. And so now I see them as 10 years old. They went from being preemie babies to, you would never know that, right? And Peyton might still be a little bit of a wimpy white boy, but that's okay.
He's out of the room, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's out of the room. So one of the things about the traditions of Christmas and the pageantry is always the nativity story, right? How this all came to be. And so I want to read with you a narration that I found that is a script for the nativity. So this night is like no other night. It's a time to dream and sing our way to Bethlehem. The little town we seek sits in the hills country. It is 10 miles south of Jerusalem. For thousands of years, the houses have all gathered there on the hilltop like a family breaking bread. Bethlehem means house of bread. And the center of the village is a small inn. And on this night, it is overflowing with people seeking sleep and a place to eat. As night gathers, the last 2 travelers come slowly up the road. Look, there's a young woman about to be a mother. She is walking with her husband. They are Joseph and Mary from Nazareth. They have walked for 6 days to come to the city where the King David was born so long ago. They have come like so many others because the Roman emperor wants to count each of them and can tax them as well. But it is late, and a very pregnant Mary is so tired. Where will they sleep? Mary and Joseph and the donkey walk up to an innkeeper and ask if there's any room in his inn. Without any word, he ushers them away and points them away from his door. Joseph and Mary move on to another inn, but when they approach the door, the innkeeper says, "No room," and he too closes the door in their faces. Joseph and Mary, feeling exhausted and rejected, go to one more inn. Joseph pleads with the innkeeper, "Please, my wife is about to give birth, and we have nowhere to stay." The innkeeper says, "There's no room for them." And he points to around the corner and says, "You may stay in my stable." Behind the inn is a dark stable. A gray donkey chooses barley and broken straw, while a weary cow leans and rests after a long day of plowing in the valley. A sheep nearby is nearly asleep. Mary and Joseph decide to sleep with the animals in the stable. And all is still and quiet in the little town of Bethlehem. So this is pretty much the story that we've all known, right? It's one of my favorite Christmas stories. And when Rod actually approached us in his Timothy group, he said, hey, I want each of you to pick, a part of, this time in a story that you feel that you'd like to share on. And I was like, oh, I know it, right? I know this story. I've seen this story. My kids have participated in plays about this story. And that was it. But on the very surface, we've all heard this, and it's really, I think, started to create kind of a false narrative if we actually look into the Word, right? We look at Bethlehem and see it as a place that is not yet ready to receive Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. We even just sang a song about Bethlehem, and in that it talks about the dreams and the hopes of Bethlehem. We know this in Micah 5:2, right? But you, Bethlehem, though you are small and among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one that will be the ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old and from ancient times. And so already there's that prophecy, the coming Messiah, the one that will lead Jerusalem, the one that will lead Israel. And so we're already setting up the events of this coming Messiah. And they've named right out loud exactly where that place would be, right? It'd be Bethlehem. Now, if you think about it, Mary and Joseph are both from Nazareth. And Mary is ready and expecting with child. So very easily, Jesus could have been born in Nazareth, right? Or maybe even along the way. But the prophecy is that he will be born in Bethlehem. And so we tend to think that, this is a negative, right? That Mary and Joseph, I even read it in the script pieces, that they're feeling rejected. There's a sense of dread that they're not wanted, and I'm going to contend that none of that is true at all, right? So as we go into the Word, we'll look at the first part of it, right? So Luke 2:4. So now Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was from the house and family of David. So if you think about it, the innkeepers, if there were innkeepers, they would have known who he is, right? They would have known he comes from royal lineage. They would have accepted him. They wouldn't have turned him away. They would have known right off the bat, after seeing his face or hearing his name, exactly who he was. So then we'll jump into Luke 2:5. So that's in order that they could register along with Mary, he was betrothed to him and was pregnant, right? So while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. So this kind of ties us into something else, right? The timing. I think in the nativity story and kind of all of our understandings, there's this idea that maybe Mary and Joseph showed up on Christmas Eve and that she's ready to go. She's ready to give birth, and they're just trying to find any place they can find so that she can give birth in a comfortable place. And that's their hope. But with this right here, it says, while they were there, the time came. So there are actually scholars and folks that have looked into this that said that they were probably there for several days, maybe even a couple weeks, right? So then we'll jump right into 2:7, and this is where it gets really good. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. So I really want to break this down into a few different areas, right? I want to talk about the language and the history and the culture and so on. And so I'm actually going to start from the bottom of this verse and work our way up. So this idea that there was no room for them in the inn. Even the innkeepers, right? There's no room for them in the inn. So the word in Greek in inn is actually kataluma. So kataluma in Greek actually stands for a guest chamber or a guest room or an upper room. So it doesn't mean the traditional commercial inn like most of us think of, right? It's not a Motel 6. Nope. Even though the light was on, it's not there, right? So, and we know that this is an appropriate translation because later on, Luke does use another word. It's called pandokion, which does mean an inn or a public house for the reception of strangers. And this is actually in Luke 10 when he does the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? So he talks about it in there. So we know he's not mixing up his Greek, right? I might mess up Greek, but he's not. He knows what he's talking about here. So I actually wanted to go into, if you could show kind of what this looks, yeah, if you would show the architecture of the houses. So there's actually some really great pictures that folks have drawn up. So this will give you kind of an idea. So we'll start with this one actually on the right. So when we talk about the kataluma and how housing was actually set up back kind of in the 1st century, there it is. That's an example of a kataluma, an upper room. So down here you've got this living area, you've got the mangers and the stable and the cooking area. So there's kind of this central place, right? And here's another one that might mean, so sometimes they felt like it would be upper room, or maybe it was like to the back of the houses. So down here you've got your stable, your mangers again. Here's that family living room, and then off to the back half would have been the guest room or the kataluma, right? So as we look at this, we start thinking about culture. Like, would they have been accepted? Was there really no room, or was there kind of this dismissive nature? And for the Middle Eastern culture, that's not true. It's actually kind of been maintained, but there's very much this idea of a mandatory hospitality, where in the Middle East they believe in providing protection and provision for any guests that would come to their home, right? Anybody that would present themselves, they just felt like there was this inherent obligation to take care of folks. And it kind of trickles into our society today, right? If we had a pregnant woman walk into this and all the seats were filled, I'm pretty sure we would have a great handful of our men that would stand up and offer a chair for her to sit down, right? We wouldn't say, maybe we don't like her kind or whatever, and not give her that. It's automatic, right? It's those blessings of the little baby that come that we will give comfort to the wife or the mother-to-be. So as we look at these structures here, we say, okay, well, if there was a kataluma, and that's what Luke is talking about, why was there no room for Mary, right? Why did they not make a space for Mary? Well, they did. We talk about the stables, and now we can see where the connection to the stables with the house would have been. But in the first century, we also know that one of the number one killers of women would have been childbirth. It would have been very, very difficult. So the idea here, and we know that Mary and Joseph have been there for some time, right, would have been to create an environment that would have been suitable for the birth. So, of course, the men, family, we know there's lots of people in this town. They would have been more toward the back of the home or in the kataluma so that we could obviously give Mary her own kind of birthing place. Very similar to when I had the birth of my little one, right? They have a specific room that we can go into that is clean and prepared and so on. So then we start thinking, okay, stable, well, that seems like a gross place. What about the animals and so on that would have been there? Well, we already know that the shepherds are out with their flocks, right? They're out in the hill country and so on. So it would have been very, not much of a stretch to think that they would have removed the animals from there and prepared this area. So if anything did go sideways in the birth, right, all the men or other women would have been to the back of the home. So that's kind of the idea there. Can we flip to a few of the other pictures? So here are just some other examples of the way this would have looked. So you've got some structures here. Again, you've got your traditional stables. And what was kind of unique about this time is that as the family grew, the house would grow. So usually you would have your typical stable, kitchen, storage, and so on, and then upper living rooms or katalumas, and so on. As a matter of fact, if we go to the next one, which is the cave. So the Church of the Nativity, we don't know this 100%, but it's believed that the Church of the Nativity is actually built over the cave or the dwelling of where Jesus was born, right? So that's kind of how it would have happened. We would have had this area here, this cave, and then the rooms and so on would have been built as part of that. So then we move on to, okay, well, we also know that everything must have been okay and satisfactory because later on the shepherds come and they witness what's going on with Mary and Joseph and the birth of this baby, right? So with that, it says that, and the shepherds went back, glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen, right? Zach did a great job kind of explaining exactly how this all would have worked. If they had gone there and saw these meager circumstances or this just farm situation and they just placed this poor mother there to have the birth of her baby, they probably would have been like, no, come with us. Let us take you somewhere else, right? Let's go find another place for you to go to. The other thing that I wanted to say, could we actually flip back to the structures? So this is where it gets pretty cool. So when babies come home, everybody wants to love and see the baby, right? I'm so excited for you guys getting grandkids, right? Like the first thing you're going to want to do is when can I go see him or her, right? So this would have made sense. Go to the very first one, sorry. So down over here, we've got the stables. So we know as evidence for the shepherds and that he would have been wrapped in cloths and placed in a manger. So there was actually these cutouts, potentially, in this little step area that you can see, and they would have named Jesus. So after Mary, everything's safe, it's all good. They would have placed the baby there. And then that gave everybody to come down into the general living area where most people, and that would have been their opportunity to see the birth, right? The miracle, get to see, God's face for the first time. And he would have been right there for everybody to see. The shepherds get to come and see. Now, maybe it wasn't the hole in the floor. It could have been those wooden or stone mangers. But nevertheless, it would have moved from the stable right to the center of the household, and that's when everybody could come together and see that. So it's less about the idea of the being born in a barn or being born without provision or protection or being asked to, leave and not be here. No, they would have created this environment that would have been well suited for anything that would have happened during the birth. And so the hopes and dreams of a coming Messiah were realized in this environment, and not quite the same story that we hear in the Nativity. So, but I don't want to miss the point here, right? Jesus was born in poor and humble circumstances. We do know that they were teenagers. They were young. They did not have much at all. I might even stretch a little bit to say that I don't think that Mary actually traveled by donkey. I think her and Joseph just walked all that way together. So with that being said, we know that after the firstborn, from Luke 2:22, that they actually provide a sacrifice, right? They would have taken him to the temple, and the idea was that they were going to basically buy back the birth of their young one. And so how they would do that would be through traditional sacrifice, right? And usually of the poor, it would be a sacrifice of 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and that would have been all that Mary and Joseph had at the moment. But does anybody know what the traditional sacrifice was that we learn more about in Leviticus? Lamb, yeah. So if you think about that, for me, that's almost like foretelling, right? It's like the perfect sacrifice would have been a lamb, but not yet, right? We know how this story ultimately is going to unfold. We have the benefit of that. But for them, they just sacrificed the 2 pigeons or the turtle doves. The young, unblemished lamb is yet to come, right? That sacrifice will happen later, and that'll happen for all of us. So again, kind of capitalizing on the major point is that the Lord God wanted to come and tabernacle with us. And to do that, he had to come into the flesh. And we learn that in John 1:14. And the Word became flesh, and it dwelled among us, and we saw his glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and full of truth.